Moving on to our next session, we have Marc Ruggiano, the founding director of the UVA Lacrosse Institute for Ethical AI and Business, which I, for one, want to learn more about, and Skyler Clark-Hamel, who is a PhD candidate at Darden, the UVA Business School. And we're going to talk about ethics and AI. And with that, take it away, guys.
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, thumbs up. Skyler, you want to give mic check?
Check, check. All right. Ooh, sounds good.
Yeah. You've got a radio voice. I never quite realized that. I think we need to switch places. No?
Soon.
All right. So we will. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. We're going to talk a little bit about the value chain of ethical AI, which is a concept, a framework that we've created at the Lacrosse Institute, and we're going to use it to explore Claude's Constitution just a little bit. But before we get into that, I am Marc Ruggiano, as Alex said. In addition to founding and launching the Lacrosse Institute, I'm a lecturer of data science, of marketing, and of healthcare at several different units at UVA, and I'm really glad to be here.
Oh. And I'm Skyler Clark-Hamel. I am a PhD candidate at Darden School of Business. I'm also a student fellow at the Lacrosse Institute for Ethical AI.
Awesome. And the Lacrosse Institute, just some basic facts about it. In addition to myself, you may know Yael Grushka-Cocaine and Raj Venkatesan. If you spend much time around UVA, you've probably crossed paths with both of my colleagues. But the three of us are the leaders of the Institute, which was launched in September of 2024. So we are a little over a year and a half old. And so, in commercial, on the commercial measurement scale, that's a pretty mature business, right? In a year and a half, you should be able to accomplish a lot. But was that me?
Wasn't me, just the...
All right. Yeah. So in university terms, though, right, 18 months is nearly nothing, and so we are a newborn in university time, but we are making good progress, and we're based at Darden, which is our home. We are focused on business, but in AI, as you all know, business is where a lot of the innovation is taking place in AI today, right? The labs, the resources that are available, the expertise, much of what is being brought to bear to move AI forward, to move us forward collectively, is happening in business. So there's not a lot that's outside the scope of the Lacrosse Institute when we say we are focused on business. And we are also interconnected with the rest of the university, with other universities and companies in the Commonwealth and beyond. And a lot of that is thanks to the generosity of two people, Dave and Kathy Lacrosse, who are great supporters of UVA. And as a result of their generosity, we're not dependent on grants or government funding or other sources. So we have a degree of independence, a degree of expected longevity to pursue an agenda that is really exciting and meaningful. Well, when we think about AI today, right, this is a little micro lumiscape, and even just this set of companies is, it's hard to figure out how do you put these, however many there are, in an arrangement that reveals some insight, right, that you can use to explore important questions, that you can use to test your hypotheses about, where we are collectively and what we need to focus on to move forward, to realize the promise and avoid some of the perils. And that's where the value chain concept came from. When we think about how to organize them to explore issues related to ethics, we have come up with this value chain, and it starts with, or it includes five important stages. The first of those is infrastructure, everything from the data centers and power and other natural resources that enable them, connectivity that brings them to us and us to them, and all the things that go inside. The second category or stage in the value chain is measurement and data, which is probably self-explanatory to all of you. Models and training, the middle stage, the third one. Similarly, probably self-explanatory to all of you. Applications and implementation is the next to last one, where we turn AI capabilities into solutions for problems or to capitalize on opportunities in particular contexts, and how we implement those solutions in those contexts, right? Those are all essential considerations in the fourth stage. And then finally, management and monitoring of outcomes, right? How we ensure that what we intended to happen when we implemented AI in a particular context is actually what is happening on an ongoing basis, given any changes to the environment, any externalities that might affect it. So those five, I'm going to talk very briefly about each of them, just to give you a sense of how we have thought about it. The first stage, infrastructure, is relatively straightforward. You can see in the top left, it is the biggest of the five segments. It's a little over $500 billion in 2025 expected revenue. And it's growing on the slow end compared to some of the other sectors. The key players, the names that you would imagine would be there, are in the lower left. And given that this is intended to be a value chain, we talk a little bit in the middle about how value flows. And if we have time, we'll come back to that. And on the right are some of the ethical considerations that come up in this stage. And note that these considerations are unique to a stage, and there's a whole additional set of considerations that intermingle, intertwine, interconnect the stages across the value chain. The second one, measurement and data, is on the smaller side, a little over $25 billion in a year or so, but growing more quickly. And this one is a really dynamic sector with some recognizable names in the lower left, but with many players that you don't see up there, you may not even recognize and know are in this business. And also, this is one that is changing dramatically as sort of the tension between those who create and believe they own information and those who seek to use it for purposes both proprietary and beneficial to us all. And so as those tensions play out, we expect this segment to grow faster and become much more visible in terms of people paying each other for what they give and what they get. In the third stage, models and training, you can see this is about $250 billion all by itself, growing quite rapidly. All of the names you would expect in the lower left. A value flow that's fairly straightforward from the people using to the people producing and operating AI. And on the right, you can see some of the ethical considerations, most of which are probably on your mind already. The next to last, applications and implementation, is another big segment. You can see a few of the players. This one's quite dependent on how you define application and implementation. So we have excluded here some of the usual suspects that build large technology infrastructure for government, for private sector, and others. When we update this, we may choose to include those. Again, the revenue flow is relatively straightforward. And the ethical considerations, the first two, are probably top of mind for many of us. And workforce impacts, both within a firm and across industry and society, are increasingly in the headlines and increasingly of concern to different segments of the population. And then finally, we start to explore issues related to governance, how you do it, and how you ensure that it supports the ethical perspectives that you want to realize. And then last, management and monitoring outcomes. Again, another small one, but an increasingly important one. If we are to maintain control over AI and continue to support human having the final say, the last say, however you put words to that, right? Then our ability to manage and monitor the outcomes that our AI is producing is essential. And of course, the biggest ethical issue here is the pace of change, right? We are having a hard time keeping up, as Anthropic's most recent pronouncements about its latest model have reminded us. Our ability to keep up, not just keep up, but perhaps to stay ahead, are essential if we want to manage AI and monitor the outcomes. So when we arrange all of that in this visual, right, that is what we call the value chain of ethical AI. And value chain goes back to a concept that a gentleman named Michael Porter created in early 1980s, became popularized in 1985 as a way of thinking about a company and where the activities of that company added value that the company could capture, right, from the things that they used as inputs to the products and services they produced as outputs. And we've taken that and we've expanded it beyond just the boundaries of one company. You can use this value chain to think about the entire industry, as we've just done. You can use it to think about a company and the things that you do and how AI is a part of them and what you should be thinking about. And then you can also think about it in terms of a project, a single project or a product, and the choices that you as a product manager or a developer are making. And those choices are what differentiates this from just the value chain, and they make it a value chain of ethical AI, and Skyler is going to talk briefly about those.
All right. So ethical AI. So clearly you guys are all interested in this. You're here. So at the Darden School of Business, they've been a leader in business ethics research and teaching for about 60 years now. The Institute for Business and Society started back in the 1960s, and now it's continuing this tradition with the La Crosse Institute for Ethical AI. So when we teach our business students, a lot of them come in and they go, well, isn't our ethics just kind of easy? You just do the right thing. Don't be a jerk. Like, yeah, that's a good start, but it's not always that easy. So we do try to equip our students with tools that they can use along the way. So one of the things that we do is we teach them these 4 ethical traditions from moral philosophy and moral psychology. So we start with principles. So this is, what a lot of people think of as deontology or Kantianism. Immanuel Kant, back in the 18th century, he was coming up with what are the principles, what are the maxims that we need to live by to be upstanding moral people. The golden rule is an example of a principle. Character. So this goes back to virtue ethics. This is Aristotle, the ancient Greeks. They understood that living a good life, a moral life, was about creating virtue and being a virtuous person. What kind of person do I want to be? And what kind of person would take these actions that we're doing? So developing good character. Consequences. That comes from utilitarianism, the 19th century in England, thinking about the ends, what are the consequences of my actions? And then care in relationships is arguably the newest one to join the ethical traditions. This comes from Carol Gilligan and her work in moral psychology and moral development, thinking about who's impacted by our decisions and thinking about the relationships and how our decisions impact those relationships. So the whole purpose of teaching this to our students is about how do you ask better questions to figure out whether I am on the right path with my decisions. Because again, when we're teaching managers, when we're teaching folks in business, they have to make a lot of decisions. They're going to have potentially big impacts. And that can be overwhelming of trying to figure out, how do I weigh all of the moral factors here? And so we give them these 4 traditions that can kind of act as a framework to help guide your decisions and help guide what kind of questions. So when we go back to the value chain of ethical AI, and we apply these moral traditions, we can start looking at what kind of questions could we ask so we can figure out where are the moral issues. So let's start with infrastructure. Think about principles. Okay, so if we take that perspective, we might ask questions like, are we sourcing compute in ways that respect legal, social, and labor obligations? Are there any non-negotiable constraints that we might violate or enable with what we're doing? Then we think about character. One of the reasons we give 4 traditions is so that you don't just stop in one place. You keep asking these questions to find where are the moral issues. So what kind of organization are we becoming with our infrastructure choices? That's about virtue. So are we exercising prudence and restraint, 2 things that might be considered, good virtues that we might want our company to have? Or are we pursuing capacity without regard for downstream risks? Consequences. So do the societal benefits of this infrastructure outweigh its environmental and social costs? How does our infrastructure investment affect long-term access, competition, and innovation across the ecosystem? And then we think about care. We're thinking about the relationship. So who bears the hidden burdens of our infrastructure, and are we attentive to them? Are we building infrastructure in ways that respect and support the communities and stakeholders affected by it? And we can do this for all of the various stages of the value chain. So let's glance through measurement and data. Principles. Do we have legitimate rights to use this data? This is certainly something that comes up a lot when we're talking about scraping the internet and trying to gather as much data as we can. So do we have the rights to this data in the first place? The character. Are we acting with honesty and integrity in how we collect that data? Are we tricking people into, giving over their data? Are we, trying to make it so that they don't know that we're taking their data? Consequences. Will the use of this data improve overall outcomes or amplify harm through bias or exclusion? I know this is something that's been on a lot of people's minds about having unbiased training sets. And then care. Are we taking on the burden of protecting those who are most vulnerable within our data? And you can do this, again, for every single one. Let's look at models and training. Let's just look at character. What kind of agent are we trying to build, and what traits should it embody? Do the model capabilities on balance increase overall welfare or risk large-scale harm? Applications and implementation. Are we deploying the system in ways that respect user rights? Consequences. In this specific use case, do the benefits outweigh the risks for all affected stakeholders? And then measurement and monitoring, again, we can do the same thing. Are we willing to acknowledge mistakes and change course when evidence demands it? That's certainly a question of character, a question of virtues. So translating this from philosophy and moral psychology into practice is often a question we get. So, all right, well, let's say that our company has a set of principles. How do we turn that into practice? Okay, well, beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, justice, explicability. These are all words that don't exactly roll off the tongue, and it might be difficult to get buy-in from folks when you're trying to say, this is the kind of company that we want to be. These are the principles that we stand by. And so one firm, Anthropic, went, well, we want our chatbot, Claude, to be helpful, honest, and harmless. So these are the ways that you can translate these into practice, which is where we get to ethical AI and the definition of ethical AI.
So when we are thinking about how those principles, how those four traditions give rise to principles and considerations of character or virtue and other things, we are talking about the tests that we have to pass, the questions that we need to be able to answer throughout the value chain. And doing those things is part of being ethical or producing ethical AI. But to us, ethical AI is the outcome, right? There are many examples of companies and products that checked all the right boxes and still ended up with an outcome that most people have agreed, experts and regular people like us have agreed is not a good outcome, right? We can go all the way back to predictive policing and things like that, where with the best intentions, if you want to believe that, but many people do, with the best intentions, we created a product against one definition of fairness that violated many other important principles, right? Whether they set out to do that or not, they did it. And the example here is to illustrate that ethical AI is an outcome, not a particular product, not a particular company, not a particular feature, or any of those other things. So when we say ethical AI, what we mean is that ethical AI is the outcome when AI is developed and used ethically, right? And so, that sort of recursive statement is a little bit difficult to get your head around. And so what we further say is that addressing the considerations that Skyler began to talk about with the questions that he posed, right? That's answering those questions at every stage. That's how you produce an outcome that we would call ethical AI.
And so let's just take a very brief look at one company, Anthropic, who calls themselves the ethical AI company. One of the ways that they've tried to address this is through Claude's constitution and constitutional AI. So they have these principles: helpful, honest, harmless. A few years ago, they released this paper, and they tried to explain how they might create a sort of constitution that will allow these AIs to train each other and to help each other reinforce their learning, and do it in such a way that doesn't require human oversight and supervision. Now, this eventually led to Claude's Constitution, which I strongly encourage everybody who's interested in this to go read. It's widely available from Anthropic. And it shows you exactly how they trained Claude to be ethical. They had these core values: be broadly safe, broadly ethical, compliant with Anthropic's guidelines, and genuinely helpful. And they essentially ranked these and said, this is what we want you to default to in this order. But it also let a lot of room for judgment. In fact, one of the things that struck me the most while reading this was the amount that they talked about Claude, use your best judgment. They're trying to develop a virtuous character within Claude so that there doesn't need to be hard and fast rules that can be brittle and don't work in every situation. And it can, make decisions. So this is a great start. This is a very interesting way to be an ethical AI company. But where does this fall in the value chain of ethical AI? So models and training, sure, that certainly falls in there, their constitution, this approach. Application implementation, a little bit. But what about infrastructure? It doesn't really address that part of the equation. Measurement and data, management and monitoring outcomes. So if we look at the full value chain, Anthropic, if the only thing that they're doing, we're not saying that it is, but if the only thing they're doing is this constitution and this approach to ethical AI, we say, yeah, that's just one piece. That's just one piece of the puzzle. And there's more along the way that we can be addressing. Which leads us finally to some takeaways, some questions that we hope that you will think about as you leave, which are, where are you and your projects in the value chain? What ethical gaps does Claude fill or not fill that you might use while you're using Claude in your projects? Where then do you need to focus? And then going back to those questions that I was reading off at the beginning from each stage, what types of questions should you be asking in your particular context? And that's it.
Should we pause there and see?
Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, what do you guys think?
Go ahead.
Skyler,
Yes.
thank you for your presentation. It's very timely. And so right now we have Amadeo at the White House talking with President Trump about the ban that was placed on Anthropic. And I'm curious, what would you say to the president and Dario
Yeah.
in the midst of their,
Yeah.
on one side, the government wants to surveil with his technology. On
Yeah.
the other side, he's got his constitution. What would you say?
So the question was, what would I say to President Trump and the folks who are currently talking about after the ban of Anthropic in the Department of Defense chain and all of that, right? Well, what I would say is every step along the way, these things matter and have incredibly large reverberations. So thinking about what are the companies that seem to care about the ethics that matter to our country and to our society. Now, who knows what the response would be, and whether that would be swaying or not. But this is what I believe, and I think what we believe, which is we do need to encourage and empower companies that put these ethical considerations first. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I haven't thought about this much. Is there any way to incentivize? I mean, this is a huge question given the breadth of the value chain. But at any stage, is there any way to incentivize, in the same way that we're seeing like carbon credits as a way to financially incentivize, right, environmental concerns? Have y'all run across ways to sort of change the game so that there's money in it to do the right thing? I mean, aside from Claude, like I feel like Anthropic is kind of reaping the benefits of making some bold ethical choices recently. But that was just them taking a gamble. Do you see the system being set up in such a way, or potential for that?
Want me to start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I would say is,
Repeat the question back.
Repeat the question. The question that I took from your comment, I think there may be a couple questions in there. The question was, are there mechanisms that we could have put in place, for example, similar to similar to carbon credits and the expected effect those have on decisions related to climate, that would help to address some of these ethical concerns about AI, and in particular about the growth of AI and its impact, on the environment. My first answer to that is I think we're already seeing some of it, and I think that those discussions at the policy level and at other levels, are playing out right now. The idea that data center builders, need to pay a larger share of the construction costs to expand production capacity, to expand the grid to accommodate, right, and other things. So, there are mechanisms that are currently being discussed in addition to ones that could be applicable, like, carbon credits or carbon offset mechanisms that you pointed out. So I think there are a couple, that are near-term potential have the near-term potential to be brought to bear. But I think there's a lot more that could be done, and certainly a lot more that we should think about. And I think it takes all of us, right, in our role as citizens, to push our elected leaders to at least, have a conversation about how some of these things can be addressed.
Well, thank you, guys. We are all out of time, but we'd be happy to chat more with you outside of the auditorium. So thank you.
Thanks.